Well, welcome. I'm very pleased to see you here this afternoon, because clearly this is something that's very pertinent at the moment with secondary admissions due at the end of October. I've got a couple of weeks to go, and we're just going to revisit some of the key dates and how the process takes place. I am just going to turn off the main lights because the screen's barely visible there. So, as you know, the admissions round opened at the 1st of September. We did have notification from the local authority that 84 people hadn't submitted their applications as of the beginning of this week, but we're not at all surprised because a lot of people are waiting for the 11 plus results. It's still fairly early, but they do keep us informed, and they also tend to send another reminder nearer the time after the 11 plus results have come out. There's always somebody who doesn't do it, and we do try to make sure we get the message out that it is definitely one of the most important things you can do. There's nothing the school can do. We can't do it for the parent. We can help, we can assist anybody with the process, but we can't do it for anybody. The actual results of the 11 plus will be posted first class on Monday the 12th of October, but you can also then get on the next day online on Tuesday the 13th from 9 AM. I think the idea is that everybody gets to hear at the same time, because in the past it's been unfair if you're a postal person and you have to wait an extra day to find out. The 14th of October is the date given for Eastwood Academy results, but I have to say that the parents said it's most definitely the 9th. That's probably been brought forward since the book was published in the beginning of July. And obviously the 31st of October is the absolute deadline. The thing is with that deadline is it is absolute, and if somebody were to miss that deadline, it would affect your child's chance of having the place that they wish. Do come on in and take a seat. I'll give you a... just sign yourself in. I do need to tell you that we are videoing this session, so I'm going to go through the content. If you want to, just sign yourself in, and then we'll have any questions at the end. So clearly, if your child has taken the 11 plus test, you're not going to complete your application until you know the results of those tests. The point of them changing it a few years ago was to ensure that when you fill in your 5 preferences, they're all realistic preferences. And in the past, you used to have to use up some of your preferences with selective schools, and then if your child was not successful, they'd effectively wasted those choices. So bringing it forward is not ideal. Children do the test very early on now in this term. However, it is for the best of reasons. It does mean you're very informed when you fill in that form later on this month. And your child is not disadvantaged as long as the school application is received by midnight on the 31st of October. Even if you're delivering it by paper, literally to the civic centre, do get a proof that you've delivered it, and again it's got to be on time. For those of you awaiting an 11 plus results letter, it will give you some advice on whether or not there's a realistic chance of your child getting in. So the magic number has been in recent years 303. Even though the nature of the test has changed, even though they've got rid of that verbal reasoning, and even though they've got the extra writing element, it's still 303 as the number. We haven't been told exactly how they get that number, but we do believe that if a question is harder, or more accurately, if a question is answered correctly by fewer candidates, it is given more value. So it's weighted. The fewer children that get it right, the more they'll get a higher score for it. And the questions that more children get right, they've got lesser value. And the reason we say it's only likely and not guaranteed is because you could have got 303 and think that's great, my child can go to the school they want to, but it's never as simple as that. If a whole host of children have put the same school in their first place, and they've all got over 303, then clearly the number for individual schools can rise. And actually, for Southend High School for Boys last year, when we asked them officially, their answer was around the 210 mark, and parents anecdotally have spoken about it being about 212. that last year boys had to achieve in order to get through to Southend High for boys, because it was the popular one last year that more people went for. However, we do believe that 303 will practically guarantee you a grammar school place, just not necessarily the one that you might put in the first choice. So I'm sure you're aware that there are ring-fenced places for 303 plus for Southend pupils. Any children from Essex, they need to have a higher threshold. They need much higher than 303. Again, it's not widely published how high that is, but that won't get an Essex child in. It's a lower score given for children in Southend so that they can get more of the local school, the local children into the local grammar schools. However, for the last few years, since it was introduced, we've never filled all those priority places. So we've never had too many children with 303 plus to fill those places. So there's never been an issue. And each year there's more and more children from the local area getting in, which is good news, but we're not at the point yet where we're fearful that those places will cause that school to rise. The single application form is also called the common application form. It's just the name for what's online, the online application basically. And you're asked to fill in your 5 preferences, literally in order of preference. I know that sounds really simple, but it has to be in the order that you would like your child to go. There's nothing tactical in this whatsoever. There's nothing to benefit you by putting a school that actually you're not that keen on, but you think it will be oversubscribed, so you know, I'm going to put it there. If you don't want your child to go there, literally drop it down further on the list. And if it's further down the list and was likely to be oversubscribed and a place comes up, you're only going to get it if the other choices above were not successful. You include all schools that you're interested in, all 5, even if they are Essex schools. You don't have to fill in a separate Essex form, but you include Essex schools on this form if you're interested in them. And if there is a meeting the threshold at 11 plus, then do include clearly selective and non-selective schools. And if it's always a good idea to make sure that you use all of your 5 preferences. So do find out about schools, do go and see them, do have a look online, and the time to do it is now before you get that result, so that you've got backups if in the case of the worst case scenario. Do be open-minded, because we do know that every school locally is working extremely hard and is improving all the time. We've got a little piece of writing here from an ex-pupil of ours who went up to Futures, and actually this is a couple of years old now, but I'm sure if we went back there now we'd find even more enthusiasm, because there's a huge amount of good work going on at Futures and at Cecil Jones and Chase. All of the non-selective schools are working incredibly hard to make sure that what they provide is what the children need. So that's really just a little bit of information there from a very happy ex-pupil who is pleased with what's being offered.
I've heard so many people about Futures though, so it's absolutely dreadful.
Well, and as I say,
I'd rather my son not go to school than go there.
And this is what I mean about being open-minded, going and taking a look, because things have changed. They really have changed, and we've personally been up, had the guided tour, seen children working at Futures who used to be our pupils. We've seen the level of the work they're working at, and we've been very impressed with that. Likewise, Mr Eastwood went last week up to Cecil Jones and had a tour and saw some of the children there. We've also been, and some of our ex-pupils from last year, some of whom had difficulty on the transition and actually have been absolutely, so well looked after and nurtured that they're doing extremely well. And Chase School, again last year, I know Mr Eastwood went up there and had a tour and a look at what they were providing, and again there is a huge amount of really good work going on there, and sometimes it's just going along and seeing it for yourself.
Do you know what date we'll find out the results?
The results will be, the 11 plus results, they'll be posted on Monday to be received on Tuesday.
So have they got the results yet or not?
Nobody's got the results yet, they come out next week.
Right, it's
The-
nervous times, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, and we fully understand that. That's why we have these meetings, so that we make sure we can sort of allay your fears and just explain to you how the process works. So the online applications, as we say, by midnight, and when it says highly recommended by midnight, it doesn't mean that at all. It means highly recommended that you use the online rather than the paper. That means you get to hear directly rather than waiting for post. Do ask us for help if you're unsure. We can help you with it, as I said earlier. We can't do it for you. Any late application is dealt with after all the children, all the places have been allocated, and after people have been given the chance to reject or accept their places. So it really is catastrophic to miss that 31st of October. And admissions queries need to be directed to there's an email address there, or you can phone the local authority at admissions@southend.gov.uk, and we can't help you with individual queries, but the local authority do put that contact in so that if you do have queries you can speak to them directly. So before you submit your form, before you start thinking about those preferences, do check in your secondary school admissions booklet, which would these came out at the beginning of July, so I hope you recognise them. But they tell you the schools, each individual school's admission criteria. They are only for Southend schools, so if you are looking at schools outside in other areas in Essex, you need to look at their website to have a look at their admissions policy. But it tells you not only the criteria of how they fill their places, but also they give you an idea of last year, how many children got in for each criteria. So for example, Belfairs is a particularly popular school, and it literally states that the last child who was able to be admitted was under criteria 4, which was children who are in the catchment. But it goes as far as to explain that the last child admitted was from a distance of 1.654 miles from the school. So it gives you an indication, if you were in their catchment, of how close you'd have to live. Of course, it's only an indication. Nobody knows this year who's going to be applying, but you do get a really clear picture of how reasonable something is. And that's what's really important about this process, because if you do put down 5 different schools for which actually there's no possibility, then you do open yourselves up to be offered whatever is left. So at least one of your choices needs to be viable.
Have you got a list of the GCSE pass rates, like grade A to C, for which schools?
No, you have to look on the individual websites for the schools themselves. They will have that sort of information. They are obliged to have that information on their website, so you're free to browse and have a look and see for each individual school what those rates are.
Because that's proof what's the best school, isn't it? What the highest rates are.
And over time, those schools at all our local schools are improving. But to look at the detail, to drill down, have a look at the individual scores that are there. Go and see the school and ask the question face to face as well, because they'll be quite happy to give you, proudly speak about the impact they've had on the schools recently.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So when you're making the application, keep your 5 schools, as I said earlier, in order of preference, because there's no guarantee of a place, even at your catchment school. Over time, as our local schools are improving, there could become a time when even a local catchment school, which might not have been your first choice, becomes really popular. And if you leave it off your form and think, do you know, I'll have that school if my others don't come off, and that will be fine. Well, it might come to a point where actually those places are all allocated, and you might end up with your child going to a school that's a lot further away and still isn't the one that you would choose. So we would always suggest within your choice of 5, include your catchment school in there. As we say, numbers are similar this year to last. There is this boom in the birth rate, but there's provision in place. They're looking now to see which secondary schools can be increased in size in the same way that we're having our building work done. So that all is in place, but we've got no reason to think that there won't be enough places for the children this year. There are definitely enough places for everyone. It does say in the book that you can make changes to your online form if necessary any time before the closing date, and I'm assuming that means even if you click submit, you can go back into it and change it, because otherwise they wouldn't have made that clear in the booklet. And how does the council allocate the places? Well, they literally tell us that it's done by computer and that it's going through the system. It's looking at each individual school in order. So the one that you've put first, looking at the criteria, does your child qualify, is there a place, and if it's a yes, it's a yes, and that's the one you'll be offered. But it will go through each of the 5, so it could be that it's a no to the first school, it's a no to the second, a yes to the third, a no to the fourth, and a yes to the final one. And because the third is your first yes, that's the one you get. Basically get your highest yes offered to you.
So is that all done at the same time then? Because I was like, the time scale must be that it's done for all children at the same time.
Well, we were discussing this as to how any system could deal with all of that at the same time, and and we were thinking logically there must be an order they do it in, and we're thinking perhaps if they do the selective schools first and then they move on and place those non-selective places, but it's all just guesswork. There's no sort of firm rationale or process explained to us, if you like. However, I did directly speak to somebody at the local authority about Shoebury. If you wanted to put Shoebury down and you wanted a place, a selective place, and you wanted to be considered, if not successful for the selective place, if you wanted also to be considered for the catchment place, how can the computer realise if you only put it down once that you want two parts to it? And she said they hand banned them, so that if you tick the selective, they banned you into both selective and non-selective for Shoebury. So there is obviously an element of hand sifting in this as well, and making sure that everybody gets entered to where they want to go. It's very hard to get your head around exactly how it can happen, but it does show that it's not purely computer. So the booklet is very important as a reference point, and as I said, it will give you the idea of how many children got in last year in each of those criteria, which just shows you how realistic your choice is. Supplementary information forms are required for a small number of schools. You do need to check this yourself if it's Essex schools, but for Southend schools you're looking at St Thomas More and St Bernard's, who need an extra form that not only do you must still fill in the local authority form, but they have a supplementary form that needs to be completed to go to that school directly as well. And I believe that's because of the religious places that they're looking at that as part of their criteria, and that's where you would provide them with that information. They also must be submitted by the 31st of October, and they go direct to the school, and they must get there by 31st of October in order for you to have a chance of receiving a place there as well. Eastwood School also have a supplementary information form, and that's because of their specialist places that they offer, their drama, dance and such, that the children who would already have been dealt with, they would have gone for their auditions. That's something that's passed, and they're the children that I said are waiting for their results, perhaps on the 9th of October now. Some Essex schools, as I say, also have these supplementary information forms, so do be aware of that. But as it says at the bottom there, you do need to do both. You can't just rely on the schools form. So National Offer Day is the 1st of March, and it will be put in the first class post for paper applications, so that there is still that disadvantage with paper application. However, if you tell the local authority that you change your email address, apparently they will treat you as a paper person once that's been changed. So whichever email address you register it with now, try to choose one that won't change. So don't use a work address if you feel that you might leave that job. Use a home one that won't change, otherwise you'll start being a paper person and you'll receive it by post on the 1st of March. 19th of January is the latest that they will take into account any change of address. I can imagine how frustrating that is if you're desperately trying to move and you're stuck in a chain, but ultimately they have a cut-off date. If you let them know by 19th of January, they have to take it into account, your change of address. After that, they don't. It's as simple as that. If you told them and you had proof of telling them, and then they failed to take account of that change of address, that would be good grounds for appeal. So you should, if you are informing them of a change of address, make sure you get some sort of receipt.
Who is
or
it that you
email.
actually, because we have moved over the summer holidays, so out of where we were in Shaftesbury to Shoebury Catchment. So who is it that I actually need to tell the council?
It is the council,
It's
it's the
council.
local authority, and right up until the 19th of January, they're the ones running that process, and they can't take it into account unless they know. But presumably your new address will be on the application form that
It
you'll be
will
filling in now, so
Yes.
you're already there.
Right.
I guess this is for people who fill it in now
And then move.
and then move. They've got to let them know before that 19th
Yeah.
of January, even if they've moved back in, November. If they haven't told them, they can't do anything about it.
Okay.
And clearly, you'll be offered either a preference, one of your 5, or if none of those come up, and that could be because they weren't realistic. In some cases, people put the name of the same school 5 times because they're so desperate to go there, not realising that it won't make it any more likely. You only need to put a school's name on there once. It will not get you any brownie points by repeating it. And the schools that you're writing down have no idea that you're putting them 3rd or 4th or 2nd. They don't know the order, and it doesn't affect the likelihood of you getting in somewhere, which order you put it in. Your yeses and nos are completely confidential, if you like, and nobody knows where they were. They do actually only offer you now 2 weeks to accept the place, and we would always suggest you accept the place offered to you. However much it might not be your first preference, knowing that your child has somewhere to go in September, and that whatever you're going to go through, be it waiting list or appeal in the meantime, knowing, and your child knowing they've got a place for September is actually very reassuring and something to work towards. I know some parents go through appeal, put children on waiting lists, and the children are oblivious. They don't even know an appeal's taking place, and of course that's just another way of making a child feel secure. It might be that things are going to change, but you'd imagine that that would be for the better for the child. But obviously that's entirely down to individuals and their situation to decide. But you only get 2 weeks. The whole process clearly takes quite a lot of time for all the places then to be allocated. You accept your place, and the minute a place hasn't been accepted at a school, they will start the jigsaw puzzle of saying, right, there's a place available there, and people will start to slot into those available spaces. So you accept the place. As you accept and you make your acceptance online, you will indicate whether, if it wasn't your first place choice, whether you want to go onto the waiting list for that school. You have a right to go on the waiting list for all 4 if you're given your 5th choice, and you have a right to appeal for all 4 if you get your 5th choice, and any combination up to that. So it's really open to you to push things as far as you want to go. Having said that, we did have a query the other day about, if you choose not to send your child into school in September because you haven't accepted and you're just steadfastly wanting a particular place, would that be something that would help your case? And it really wouldn't. There's no way that it would elevate you any further keeping your child out of school. They're not going to be any more likely to give you the place you want. Clearly we want all the children to have a place and to be going to a school in September. The admissions appeals closing date is the 1st of April. So having had the 2 weeks there to accept, you've then got 2 weeks to decide if you want to appeal, and it transfers to the individual schools after the 22nd of August. So the local authority keeps control of all of this until very near the end of the summer holidays, and then you're talking to the school about the waiting list rather than the local authority. Usually they'll give you information as well, such as how far you are on that waiting list, how many other children are ahead of you, where the cut-off in terms of distance, if it was down to, as the crow flies, distance from the school. They'll give you some idea of the reality of you getting a place if you're on a waiting list as well. So you should accept your offer of a school place, and then of course you can be on a waiting list or up to 4 other waiting lists, but you should still accept it so you secure that place. If you don't accept it, when it all starts to move around, that place you had will be offered to somebody else. So there is, it always makes me a bit nervous, the last bullet point on here, but booklet does make clear that they can withdraw places that they've offered, the local authority, if a parent has failed to respond to an offer. So if you don't accept the offer within those 2 weeks, then of course when it comes to the big jigsaw puzzle doing, if you haven't accepted the place, you're going to lose it. Or if they find that there's any sort of fraudulence around the address where the child normally resides, then that place can be withdrawn as well, because clearly sometimes there will be issues where perhaps a child lives somewhere half the week or whatever, and if it can be proven that a child has made that false claim, or a parent has made that false claim on behalf of the child, that place can be withdrawn. And then the last one, as I say, makes me a bit nervous, but they state that, where they've offered the place in error, I think they'd have to have clear grounds for how that happened. But they obviously reserve the right to withdraw a school place in those 3 situations. When it comes to grounds for appeal, as I said, one of the things could be a technicality. So if you wanted to appeal for a school, you probably know that appeals are very rarely successful. And the booklet, again, tells you exactly how many appeals there were, how many were actually heard. I think many before that when it's less, I think that's usually because people withdraw rather than they don't take it any further. And then how many were actually successful. And it is a very small number, but we would still say, if you have your heart set on a school, then you should go ahead and appeal. The general advice is that if there is a reason to think there's been a technical difficulty, such as you told them that you changed address and they failed to take that into account, then that would clearly be a good grounds for appeal. You can't appeal if it's a selective school that you're appealing for, and you can appeal, but you're unlikely to be successful if you're wanting to say your child was ill on the day, because they've already made you sign to say that your child was okay to take the test that day. But we have had people who have appealed for different reasons, such as particular circumstances around the child and their situation at that time. So perhaps either a bereavement or a split in the family that was very close to it, and the impact that would have on them. Again, it's all sorts of reasons which are around the child. Again, they're not usually terribly successful, but we do feel that we should advise that if that's how you feel you should do it, you should not be put off by the fact that not many people are successful, because occasionally they are, and it's worth going for if it's what you and your child wants. The appeals process is all in the admissions booklet anyway, but do come and see us for some advice if you get to that point. As I said earlier, even if you're going to appeal, you must still accept that place offered, so your child is somewhere for September. And as I said, the order of preference is literally private to you. The schools don't know which order, and you just get allocated your yes or no for your options, so there's nothing to benefit you by putting a school's name more than once. And as I said, for the specific schools, and you may know about the newest change to the Shoebury admissions criteria, in that they used to have the selective places available, and not many children would take up those places, because the majority of children who would get their 303 plus would go to the other grammar schools, and a small number would go to Shoebury. And what they've had permission to do now, their admissions criteria now mean that a child who's borderline, so 298 plus, can actually be considered now. So that you could tick for a selective place for Shoebury even if your child scored lower than 303. Anything above 298 would make that a viable option. And as I say, you still only need to put it on the form once, because they manually then enter you for the selective and the non-selective place.
So you've got Southend and then you've got Westcliff. These are the top 2 basically, and then Shoebury's third.
I don't know that we'd say that there's any sort of ranking here whatsoever, because that's entirely up to you to consider that. What I was saying about the majority of the Shoebury places not being taken up is that traditionally, if somebody has met that threshold, if a child's met that threshold, they rarely take up the places at Shoebury if they they get a place at Westcliff or Southend. Doesn't mean that they're any better, and there are still always 3 or 4 children a year who, even though they've got the 303 and would have got a place at Westcliff or Southend, if we're talking about the boys, for example, or all the girls for that matter, they, or of course St Bernard's, they don't always tend to take that place. You get a small number who say that I'd rather my child was at Shoebury, with that selective place at Shoebury, even though they've passed the 11 plus. So it's very much parental choice. It's all open to you. But I think Shoebury, having only had a small number of places, have now sort of exercised that right to take the children who are in that sort of just nearly made it category. And there are obviously different ways of looking at that. You could argue that that's great. It's a bit of a backup for some children who might be so close to it. But if you get 302.9987 or whatever, and it really does go to that many decimal places, if you're that close, you still haven't met the 303 threshold, and therefore it's a way of putting down that selective schools on your preferences. So actually, in one way you could view it as a really nice sort of backup for children who've nearly got there. But of course you can look at it from the other side and think those are 28 places that Shoebury are now not giving to the school, to the children who may well be within catchment for Shoebury, or slightly out of catchment here, that now won't have the chance to get in. So it is a bit of a catch-22 situation, and depending on your own situation, you might think of it as a good thing, you might think of it as actually not so good. But it did all go through consultation this time last year.
So is that the amount of places they've allocated? Up to 28?
Up to 28 for 298
plus.
Okay. I think I've gone through that. It's basically just reiterating how the places are allocated, and as you go through the form, they will ask you if you want to go onto the waiting list for any schools that will hire the place you've been offered. As I said at the beginning, we do know that the standards at all the secondary schools are improving. We know that the schools at the end of August for Futures, for example, were just amazing. They really are putting everything into it. And we also know that because there's been a traditionally low take-up, that they've got smaller class sizes, which are beneficial. We've heard lots of stories about particular children with needs and issues that have been very, very well catered for, alongside people who've are more able and have been stretched. So we are hearing very positive things about all the secondary schools, and we do know that children succeed in all of them. It's very often what your child puts in as to what they're able to take out. And so I think the most important thing is that those of you waiting for the 11 plus results, it's going to be a very nerve-wracking time, and it's important that the child knows that whatever happens in March, when they get those results of where they're going to go, they need to know it won't determine their journey through life. It's not this, oh yes, it's wonderful, or oh no, it's catastrophic. And it's not the end of the process either, because ultimately you still, of course, got the chance to transfer in year over time if the school your child goes to then proves not to be the right one for them. We added that last but one bullet point about being sensitive, because clearly there are sometimes comments made about certain schools, and actually every school has parents who are very, very happy with their child there, and parents who are happy for their child to go there in September. And we have to be very mindful of the fact that, it is a good experience for the children, whatever school they go to. It's what they make of it. And just to finish off there with a good luck, because we do know that it's not an easy process to go through. We are here though, if you have any queries. As I say, we can fill in the form with you, or we can talk to you about the order of your 5 preferences. It's not tactical, as I say, but if there's any advice anybody wants, we're here. So please do make an appointment to come in before, clearly, we break up for half term, and get those forms in by the 31st of October. And we'll move on to any questions.
Do you need the candidate number?